Welcome to Lab 3, and in Lab 3 we will discuss about pipelines and middlewares. Now before I dive into middlewares and pipelines, let us try to be in sync, or let us try to be on the same page about three vocabularies: request, response and context. Because if these three vocabularies are not understood properly, and when we see the code of middlewares and pipelines, it would be quite confusing. So if you see what really happens, when an end user sends a request to the server. So the end user sends a request to the server processes the request and sends a response. So in the request, he can send some form data, he can send JSON, he can send things, and the server will process this request and send HTML. This single request and response is termed as a context. So you can think about that context is equal to request plus response. So one single context, when I say, is nothing but it is a single request and the response for that request. If you closely analyze the request pipeline, I don't know what word to use there, but if you closely analyze the request, as a developer, we pass that request through series of logics. So we can have a pipeline, and in that pipeline, we put things like authorization logic, we put authentication logic, we do some processing, and the final response is sent. So if you really look at the whole request pipeline, it is nothing but it is series of logic which gets executed. So as a developer, we would like to know that how can we go and build this pipeline? Where is a place we can go and put this series of logic which can be executed one after another, and that is done in the startup.cs file. So let us go ahead in the startup.cs file and let us see that how we can go and build this linked list or build this chain of logics through which our request can pass. So this configuration of the pipeline is done in the startup.cs file, and it is done in this configure method. And the pipeline is configured by using this object called as app. This app is nothing but the object which belongs to this iApplication Builder. As the name says, it is a builder. So this iApplication Builder object helps you to build that series of linked list through which your request will actually go. Now let me do like this. Let me go and remove a lot of things from this startup.cs file, because I can understand that a lot of things are confusing here, right? So let me do like this. Let me go and remove all of these things from here. And if you remember, in the previous part of the video, I said that one of the big benefits of MVC core is that you can configure what you need. So if you want, you can just leave everything as it is, or if you want, you can just put MVC, or you can just put HTML, you can just put HTML plus MVC. So what I've done for now is I have removed everything. I have just kept only one method called as configure, and this is where we built the pipeline. You can see here, in the default comments, Microsoft has mentioned here that use this method to configure the HTTP request pipeline. Okay, so let us go ahead here and let us write some logic like logic 1, logic 2, logic 3. So let us say that we want to pass our request through logic 1. We want to pass our request through logic 2. So let me create here some logics. Logic 3. Right. Now these series of logic which are interconnected with each other will take in the request and the response object and work on it. So at the end of the day, these logics will actually work on the request and response. So in other words, the inputs to these logics is nothing but the HTTP context. Remember, I said HTTP context is a combination of the request and response, right? So you can see here that in order to use the HTTP context, we need to go and use this ASP.NET Core.HTTP. So I'm going to go and select this. So even here the same thing. So each one of these logic 1, logic 2 and logic 3 will take in the HTTP context and will work on the request, or probably will work on the response, and then pass that output to the next logic. Now, let us say at this moment I want to build a pipeline, a request pipeline, wherein first the logic 1 will run, then the logic 2 will run, and then the logic 3 will run. That means logic 1 will have the next logic, which should be pointed out. Logic 2 will point towards the next logic, that is logic 3, but logic 3 will not have anything next. It is a final logic. Again, I repeat this sentence. Logic 1 will point towards logic 2. Logic 2 will point towards logic 3, but logic 3 will not point towards anyone, right? So in other words, the logic 1 and logic 2 will have the next function or the next task which will get executed. Logic 2 will have the next task which will get executed, but logic 3 will not have anything. Now, in case you are new to this func keyword and task keyword, I would suggest to go and watch two videos. This func video I have explained in the delegate section. So we have one video, where I have talked about func and actions, right? Just to summarize, func is nothing but it is a delegate. And also, in case you are new to task, I would suggest to go and watch the threading videos, where I've explained what exactly is a task. So in this video, I will not talk about this func and task. I would suggest to go and watch those two videos. So logic 1 using this next will point towards logic 2. Logic 2 using this next will point towards logic 3, but logic 3 is the final one. Now these series of logic will be chained or will be linked listed by using this app builder, this application builder, right? Now the application builder needs that each one of these logic should emit out a task, so they cannot be void here. So it wants that each one of these logics should give out a task. So you can see that I have replaced the void with the task, and on the top of it, these tasks are asynchronous in nature. So they are not just synchronous tasks, but they are async. So what this application builder wants is that he wants that each one of these logic will give out a task, and they are asynchronous in nature. In case you are new to this async keyword, remember that this is this async keyword is actually paired with the await keyword, which I will talk very soon. So in case you are new to async and await, I would suggest to please go and watch this video where I've explained the importance of the async keyword. So for this application builder, this has to be a task and it should be async in nature. So now let's say in task 1, what I will do is in the response, I will just write logic 1. So you can see here, I am saying here await. So on the context object, remember I said on the context object, we will have both. We will have a request object and as well as we will have a response object. So I'm saying here response.write async, right? And because this logic 1 will invoke logic 2, I have to also say here await obj dot so await and please invoke the next logic. So you can see here I am saying here first I'm writing the response as logic 1. So you can see here I'm writing the response as logic 2, right? And I'm saying invoke. But for logic 3, there won't be any next dot invoke. It is just writing the final logic and saying, okay, now send this whole thing to the browser, right? So you can see in logic 1, I am saying invoke the next logic. In logic 2, I am saying invoke the next logic. But in logic 3, I'm not saying anything, right? So now that we have built in all the logic, we have written all the logic 1, logic 2, logic 3, it is now time to go in the configure method and put these logics one after another. So putting them into sequence is done in this configure method out here. Now this app object out here, this iApplication builder object out here has two methods. One is it has a method which is use and the other method is run. Now this use method is used to connect logic which has a next. So for example, logic 1 and logic 2 will be configured by using the use method, while the run method is used to configure the logic which is the final one, logic 3, right? So basically here I will say here now app.use. Okay, so you can see now, you can see there's a word here called as middleware which is coming in, right? So just to tell you what exactly this middleware is. This middleware is nothing but it is a delegate, it is a logic which you are putting in the pipeline. So middleware is nothing but it is a logic which you are putting in the request pipeline, right? So you can see here I'm saying app.use, and remember this is an async operation. So I'll say take the context object, async context object, and call logic 1, right? And remember that over here we also have the next. So you can see here I'm saying invoke logic 1 and pass him the context and the next function which will be called. Look at this code here. This code is using lambda expression. In case, again, if you're new to lambda expression, please go and watch this video, where I've explained what is lambda expression, what is a func, what is a delegate, and a lot of things out here, right? So you can see, I will say here app.use logic 1. After that, I would wish to fire logic 2. And then I will say app.run, the final logic, that is logic 3. I'll be using app.run, and the final logic does not have a next. So two important methods here, app.use and app.run. Now the sequence of the code here is very important, because now here what we are saying is fire logic 1 first, fire logic 2, and then logic 3. In case if you go and put this at the top, if you go and if you put the code here, then logic 2 will fire first, logic 1 will fire later, and logic 3 will fire finally. So please note that the sequence of how your app.use is called is important, because that sequence defines how the logics will invoke one after another, right? So by doing this, now let us do a control F5. Let us see that if our code runs. So you can see I've done a control F5. Remember, when I do a control F5, at the end of the day, he will go and say .NET build and .NET run internally. Remember, I talked about both these concepts previously. So at the end of the day, he will do a .NET build and he will do a .NET run, right? So it's using all that .NET Core fundamentals internally. So now what my expectation here is, I would expect to first see in the response.write logic 1, then I would expect to see logic 2, you can see out there, and then finally logic 3, right? So in order to configure the pipeline, we use something called as the app builder, the application builder, and the application builder has two methods, use and run. Now, if you see in all the Microsoft code online, when you go and see any kind of code online, especially in the configure method, people write the code like this. If you see at this moment, what I've done is I have written a separate function and then I have attached the function in the use and the run, right? A lot of people, what they do is, they write like this, app.run, and they directly write the code over here. So this code is equivalent to this code, right? Or this code. The only thing is that I have written the logic in a separate function, right? So if you see this code, do not get surprised. It is the same code which I have explained here. Only thing is that I have broken the code into small logical pieces so that you can understand properly, right? Good. But now, when you say that you want to write logic, you write logic in classes. You don't write logic in functions, right? So it would be great that if we can go and build this logic or this middleware by using classes rather than functions. So that is again what you can do here. So in order to go and write this logic into a class, you need to go and add a middleware. Remember, a middleware is nothing but it is synonym to the logic which you write in the pipeline. So in the request pipeline, the logic 1, logic 2, logic 3 are nothing but they are middleware. So it's the same thing. So in order to go and add a middleware, I will go and I will add a class, right? So let me add a class, and there is a template given by Microsoft here. So you can go and just add this middleware class. So you can see here, this is middleware. I'll say logic 1. In the same way, I can add logic 2, right? So let me add 2 middlewares here. So middleware logic 1 and middleware logic 2, right? So let us say in logic 1, what I will do is, again, you can see if you look at the middleware, it's the same thing. There is a logic and there is a next delegate, right? It's the same thing. So over here, what we will do is we will go and again write on the HTTP context. So I will say here HTTP context dot response dot write async. This is logic 1, right? And remember that this is an async task. So you have to put an async here and you have to put a await here, right? So these things are not changing. Here also we have to put a await, right? The same things. In the same way, I will go to the logic 2, and in logic 2 also I will put the same thing. So async and await. So remember, please, it has to be an async and await, right? So you can see now I've created 2 middleware logics here, middleware logic 1. So there is a middleware logic 1 and there is a middleware logic 2, right? So now let us say that I want to go and put these logics over here, right? So I will say here app dot use middleware. You can see here, right? Use middleware. So I can say here use middleware logic 1, and then I can say app dot use middleware logic 2. Middleware logic 2. So you can see middleware logic 2. But please note that you still need an app.run, because the app.run, what it does is it just signals that this is the final logic, right? So the use middleware is to connect, the logics, which have a next, and the run is to connect the logic which is final, right? So what I will do is, as a final logic, I will execute logic 3. So I will say this is logic 3, right? So async context async. Okay, go and execute logic 3. Right. So you can see now what will happen is it will first execute middleware logic 1, middleware logic 2, and then finally it will execute logic 3. So middlewares are nothing but they are logic which we put in the pipeline, and middleware you can write in classes, and you should write using classes. You shouldn't be writing such kind of functions, because such kind of functions will become very difficult to maintain later on, right? So create proper classes, use object-oriented programming, and write your middleware, right? So now if I go and run this, I will have the same kind of output which I had previously, but this time my middleware is coded in classes, right? So you can see here, I think in the middleware logic 2, I just copy pasted, very bad. This is logic 2, right? Just build this. So that I copy pasted, that's why it is showing logic 1, logic 1. So that is logic 1, that is logic 2, that is logic 3, right? So to add a middleware, you have to right click and say add a class and add the type as a middleware, and this is what you get. Now you can see here I have used app.use middleware, but what Microsoft has done, in this middleware class, they have also created a static class called as use middleware with a static method. So if you don't want to write such kind of a big code here, you can always go and say here app dot use middleware logic 1. You can directly say this, that can minimize a lot of your code, right? So what they've done is they have just created a wrapper function inside these middlewares, which actually call the same code, right? So it's the same code which gets called, but like this looks more clean, right? So middleware logic 2. So if you want, you can go and call those static methods, rather than writing use middleware and the class name here. At this moment, if you see, the request which we have handled, right, is a pretty simple request. It's a default request. But what if I want to do something like this? I want to say that, okay, for default request, I want to execute logic 1, logic 2, and logic 3. But if somebody goes and types in the request in the URL /home, I want to execute some other logic. Or if somebody goes and gives a query string, saying, okay, search is equal to test, right, or something, then if there is a query string of search, then I would like to go and execute some other request, right? So what if, looking at the URLs and query string, you want to go and execute request? And that's where we have something called as the map. So this map, what it does is, so we have two things here. One is we have the map, and one is we have the map when. So what I can do is I can use the map. Let us start with map. So I can say here, okay, if somebody goes and types /home, then I want to go and execute the following logic. So if you look at this app.map, it actually takes an action which is having an input of an iApplication builder. So let me go and create a method here, something like execute, which takes an iApplication builder, right? And inside this, let us go and run some logic. So what I'll do is I will go and run this logic. So let's say that I have a logic here, logic home, right? So let's say this is logic home. So what I want to do is, this execute will actually execute logic home, right? So now what I want to do is I will say here, okay, if somebody goes and types /home, then we will go and execute this execute function, and this execute function will execute the logic home, and the logic home will display logic home, right? So if you want to go and build your middleware pipeline using using the URLs and using the query string, right, then you need to use the map and the map when. So now if I run this, so let us say if I do a control F5. So if you see at this moment, I did not do anything, right? My URL is just a simple URL. It does not have any kind of slash, it does not have any kind of query string. So it says that, okay, for default URL or for default request, I will first execute logic 1, logic 2, and logic 3. So you can see it is done. But if I go and type here /home, you can see that now he executes logic home. So for default, he's executing this, but as soon as he finds a /home, he executes this. So by using the map function, depending on the URL, you can decide which logic can be executed. Now let us say that you want to do mapping on the base of some predicate. Predicate means, for example, if somebody goes and types here search test, then only go and execute, not just on /home. So what you can do is you can go and use the use when, map when. So in the map when, you can say that, okay, you can say map when I find a search, right? So you can see here, I'm saying that if I don't see this in the request.query string, if I don't see the search query string, this will not execute. So what I can do here is I can say this execute. So let's say I have logic search. Let me just go and create a function here, logic search. Remember, in your project, you should not be copy pasting like this. This is just for demonstration purpose. Logic search, and I will say this is execute search and logic search. So now what I would like to do is I'd like to say that when it is search, execute search. So now if you see, let's look at the various requests fulfilled. So you can see the basic request will execute all the logics. So it will execute your default logic, logic 1, logic 2, logic 3. If I go and say /home, it executes home. But if I have some query parameters like search is equal to test, what happened? Search, query string, not a slash, query string. Can you see now? That's search equal to test. So now you can, for default request to build a pipeline using the middlewares, you can just say app.use. You can use app.map when you say that you want to have URL based pipelines, and you can use app.map when you want to have pipelines on the base of some predicate, like you want to find a search string or you want to find a query string and so on. Great. So why am I discussing about pipelines so much, right? First thing, definitely, the pipelines are the lifelines to make your request pipeline much better. So definitely, like if you can put a lot of things in a pipeline, then your main code is only concentrating on the processing part. Like for example, authentication, authorization. Rather than putting that code in every controller and every page, right? You can just go and put it out here, right? So that's why pipelines are the building blocks for having reusable components in your HTTP request. But the other thing why I've discussed pipelines so much is, without pipelines you cannot use MVC at all. You cannot use web applications at all. So in case of MVC core, if you say you want to execute a website, you have to go through a pipeline. For example, if you see at this moment, if you remember, I said that in the www root we put all our HTML. So let us say that I create an HTML here. So let us say I just add an HTML page. So if you remember, I said in www root we put static content. So let's say I have a static content here, HTML page.html, right? So this is HTML. Now if I want to go and execute, or if I want to go and see this page here, so if you see here, if I go and type here HTML page.html, nothing will happen. You can see that it is just blank. It is not doing anything. Why? Because you have not invoked the pipeline, or you have not added the middleware which actually loads HTML, right? So we have to say here, like the way we are saying use our middleware, use this, right? In the same way here we have to say use static files. Without this, HTMLs will not run. In the same way, if you want to enable MVC, you have to say use MVC. So basically, without the middlewares, you cannot do anything in MVC cores, right? So you can see now I have invoked this, I have added this middleware of use static files. So with this, what will happen is now I should be able to display my pages. So if I go out here, and if I say reload, you can see now my HTML page is running because you have put the appropriate middleware which loads static files, right? In the same way for MVC also, we need to do the same thing. We need to say here app.use MVC. So that brings us to the end of this 30 minutes of video. Now here is a small request, and I do this in every lecture of step by step. Do let us know that what you're feeling about us, what you're feeling about this class, right? So let us know that on which lab you are on, where you are facing a problem, right? Which lab you did not understand. So with that, we come to know that how many people are seeing those labs and what are the issues, right? So please do go to facebook.com/questpond and let us know on which lab you are on and what you're looking at. Thank you very much. So now the next lab will be more in depth into MVC. So till now we have covered the startup, we have covered the request, we have covered app.use, we have covered app.run, we have covered app.map, we have covered middlewares. Now it is time to go inside MVC and see that how we can run MVC and how the controller runs, how the model loads, how the view runs. Thank you very much.